What is going on, everyone? It's your guy, Cole Jackson, back here on Road Graders, coming to you with a Day 2 recap of the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine. Coming to you a little bit later in the day. Day 3 is already well underway in terms of measurement drills, but we're going to be going through some of the corners, safeties, and tight ends that stood out, both for good and bad reasons. Today brought to you by BetUS. BetUS wants to know, what do you think the first thing the Baltimore Ravens should be doing in this off season? You can go over to BetUS. Obviously, a ton of college basketball going on right now. Get in on the action. Use promo code YouTube150, and you can jump in and play on those bets. More money in your bank account, more money in your bets, more money in your wallets. So let's jump into it here, and we're going to be starting with the corners, taking a look at some of the winners. And for me, obviously, the biggest guy that stood out, Darian Porter out of Iowa State. This was a guy that was long seen as sort of a second rounder, more of an end of the second round type guy, but this type of high level athleticism, almost a perfect 10 in his relative athletic score. Came in with pretty good size, a little bit lighter than you'd like to see. And I thought the weight was interesting because one of the biggest things in Darian Porter's film, his biggest weakness is his tackling and his run defense. So to kind of see him come in a little bit lighter, it kind of reminds you of some of the commentary around a guy like Nate Wiggins. So I thought that was really interesting, but he just couldn't have measured much better. I mean, 4.3 flat in his 40-yard dash, elite splits, his agility looking good. And, that's really what I wanted to see in terms of his shuttle and his three cone, because I think you really see that fluidity in his film. And so just to see it kind of backed up with the measurements was good. Obviously, good explosion as well. Better in the broad than in the vert, but just a very explosive athlete, a guy that is a little bit wiry, longer limbed, but I think he's a much better football player than a guy like Emmanuel Forbes, who was one of those kind of ball hawk guys. I think Darian Porter's real advantage is his coverage skills. I mean, if you look, he hasn't allowed a touchdown in the last 2 years. That's 20 games. He's only allowed 2 in his college career, he had 2 touchdowns allowed in 11 games. And the big thing in 2024 is you got a little bit more ball production out of him. And the other big thing is he just wasn't targeted a lot because of how he blanketed. So a little bit similarity to Emmanuel Forbes in terms of his frame, but completely different style of player, more of a coverage corner versus a ball hawk. Nice to see him take a little bit of a step up in terms of some of that on ball production. I thought that was a positive thing to see, but that's still one of the biggest question marks around him, but obviously checked all the boxes in terms of athletics. Looking at Trey Amos, a guy that's kind of trying to break into that first round category out of the University of Mississippi, came in, measured pretty well in terms of height, weight, length. I think all that was pretty solid. Again, a little bit lighter, but that seems to just be a trend with some of these corners nowadays. But he blazed in the 40, and I was kind of surprised. I didn't expect him to run that fast. I didn't think he ran that fast on his film. I'm not saying he was getting burnt all the time, but I was just a little surprised to see how solid it was. Now, his vertical wasn't very good, but his broad was, and I think that's a pretty interesting thing to see in terms of Trey Amos, because I do think you see some of that ability, especially he's a very physical guy, pretty good run defender in addition to being a really solid zone. They seem to play a lot more zone than man at Ole Miss. Big thing with him was just I think you'd like to see, again, kind of similar to the last guy, a little bit more on-ball production. 3 interceptions in the last 3 years, just not a ton. More targets than some of these other guys, but he wasn't necessarily bad. He led he was 13th. I think he leads all draftable corners, but he was tied for 13th in the NCAA with forced incompletions. So really speaks to his coverage skills. So really complete player, a guy that definitely will be in that first round mix. And as a guy that's going to be going at the end of the first round, definitely in the mix at 27 for the Baltimore Ravens. Moving on to Jahdae Barron. I have him as a winner. Obviously, you see a little bit of yellow in there. I mean, with his size, we knew he was going to be smaller. So I guess I'm not going to hold that against him because we just kind of already knew he was a smaller guy. He's just such an interesting cat because he played all over that Texas defense. He had 679 snaps as an outside corner, 122 in the slot, but interestingly, 142 in the box. So just a guy that they moved all over, kind of like a chess piece. I see him as more of a slot corner. So it's usually with slot corners, they're a little bit smaller. You can see his arm length is really low. So he's definitely a small dude, small hands, that sort of thing. But he ran extremely well. And that was the biggest thing I wanted to see out of him, because I thought with a dude like this that's a little bit smaller, despite having really good run defense, very physical, good tackler, so not concerns there in terms of size, but I think you really want to see him run well. I expected his agility to come in really well, because that's what you see on tape. He didn't measure, so I think that would have really bumped him up, but was a little surprised with the lack of explosiveness. It's always interesting when a guy lacks that kind of explosive measurement but has a really solid 10-yard split, because that's really those first 3-4 strides in your sprint. So usually there's a bit of a correlation between that and your broad jump, for example. But I thought he checked a lot of boxes in terms of what he had to come in here and do as an undersized guy, and it was really the running ability. I thought he should have tested his agility skills, just because it would have really shown some of that, inside ability that he could show at the next level as a slot corner. But definitely a guy that I think will keep himself in the first round category as a corner going into this draft, especially as a slot corner. Moving into some of the guys that I thought lost a little bit, Kobe Bryant out of the University of Kansas. He came in undersized, which I was a little surprised about, especially, again, I keep looking at the weights and, they're all coming in kind of undersized, but he didn't measure a lot. I think he said something prior to the combine that he wasn't going to be doing all the testing, so we were expecting that, but he just didn't run well. I didn't think he ran overly well in his film, so it kind of matched that. I think that kind of pushes him down, in my opinion, a little bit. He's the kind of guy that I was looking at as sort of one of those mid-round guys that the Ravens could invest in. One thing about him, though, in terms of his tape, really physical cat, especially in the run game. So if they're looking to kind of replace Brandon Stevens with someone that they can move around a little bit in terms of having some of those other transferable skills, someone that can run the alley a little bit, Kobe Bryant could definitely be in that mix. But I thought he hurt himself a little bit with his measurements. And again, when you're going to go out and not run a very good 40, I think you'd like to try and show a little bit of explosiveness or some agility ability. So I think not testing there is going to hurt him. So he definitely drops a little bit, in my opinion. And then O'Donnell Fortune was a guy that I was really looking at as a late round guy. Obviously, again, came in lightweight. This is just such a common theme with some of these corners, but his explosiveness skills really, really low. Another guy that I thought was very physical on tape. And kind of a zone defense merchant, but I just don't think he's going to be able to hold up in man coverage at the next level. His testing didn't really do anything to kind of get me excited to go back to his tape. So it's going to be tough to kind of push him through, in my opinion anyway, in terms of things that I'd be looking for. Then you get into the safety group, and literally no one did as well in this entire combine so far than Nick Emmanwori. And I think he is now based on the relative athletic score database, he is now the top tester in combine history. You could take his relative athletic score, you could put in strong safety, free safety, corner, and linebacker, and he comes out as a 10. He broke the measurement scale, basically. This is a guy that, is definitely, I think, it's tough, right? Because he's a guy that can move all over the defense. He played 146 snaps in the slot, 214 in the box, and 193 deep. Reminds me a ton of Kyle Hamilton in terms of where you could play him. I'm not sure coming out he's as refined as a football player as Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton was such a good football player coming out. Nick Emmanwori might be more of an athlete, but isn't as good of a football player, if that makes sense. But I do think in terms of his use, it'd be like having two Kyle Hamiltons, and that is something that I would never say no to. If you kind of have those two, ability to play the slot, play in the box, especially in your dime package, and then you have a deep free safety, someone like Ardarius Washington, you can just be so creative in terms of the packages you put out there, and his testing really backed that up, especially when you look at his ability to kind of come down and run the alley and be physical inside. He has all those abilities, so And a big thing was he showed an ability to get after the ball this year. He had 4 interceptions. So he showed a little bit more of that playmaking ability. So someone that's definitely in consideration for me at 27, just absolutely destroyed the combine. Simply said, he literally is historically the best tester in combine history now. Insane stuff. You look at a guy like Jonas Sanker. The safety class is a little weird because there's really not that many guys that I'm overly interested in. And really what I'm looking for is some of those versatile cats, because that's what I think the Ravens want to get. And Sanker came out and he ran much better than I was expecting. And he showed some pretty good explosiveness ability, especially you can see there in his broad, getting him a 9.54 RAS. So definitely a guy that, my opinion moved up a little bit on him. He's someone that doesn't have a ton of ball production, which is always a big concern with me, but does pretty good in terms of having 15 coverage stops, 16 run stops, all of those in the top 100 of FBS ball last year. So just a very versatile player, someone that I feel like I can kind of play wherever on the football field, which again is kind of my priority, looking for a safety in this class. And then we get into someone that, if you've been watching my mock drafts, I go after Hunter Wohler almost every time. Out of the University of Wisconsin, a guy that I just love the skill set, love the physicality, just a true ball player. And he came out and, again, checked a lot of boxes. I didn't think he was going to test this athletically. He's one of those guys that I think, his tape is really solid, especially as a guy that I think is more of kind of a box defender or a special teamer at the next level. But Hunter Wohler is definitely one of those guys that fits what the Ravens want in a safety group. Again, versatile, can play a bunch of different spots. I think is best in the box, but came out and tested really well. I thought his speed came out about what I was expecting. He's definitely not a burner, but he tested pretty well. And the 3-cone was the big thing for me, because as a box defender, what I look at him is, can he be the type of guy that's sort of we'll call it a transition to linebacker, but more as like a coverage linebacker specialist. So a dime backer or a coverage specialist as a nickel backer. That might be Hunter Wohler's future, as that kind of converted safety to linebacker. And I think he came in and he had good weight. And he ran well at good rate at that weight, which is big. If you convert his RAS to linebacker, he's obviously undersized and he loses his grades in terms of that composite size score, but all of his other measurements go up because obviously comparing against linebackers historically. So definitely one of those guys that I think is a clear winner, will definitely be in the mix as kind of a 4th, 5th round pick, that kind of mid-round range. Then we look at some of the losers. Malachi Starks, his tape is a lot better than he tested, so I still expect him to go in the 1st round. I've already seen a lot of guys like Chris Aguilera, one of the best in the draft community here for the Baltimore Ravens fan base, said, let him fall to 27. I'll happily pick him. So he's definitely a loser, though, in terms of overall scoring. Came in later, ran well, so that's good. But, that vertical was really, really poor. Didn't look overly fluid or explosive in the on-field drills either. So just a guy that I think is going to lose some of those athletic scores that kind of boost guys up. But that's, again, looking at in the context of a 1st round pick. And it could be something that, teams just, again, he didn't check enough boxes and it might take them off the board in the 1st round, pushing him down, and could definitely be in play at 27, because he is a much better football player than he tested in terms of an athlete. And then a guy that a lot of you'll be familiar with, Dante Trader out of Maryland, someone that I thought would be a really interesting guy as a special teamer, more of a box safety at the next level. That's mostly where he played in that Terrapin defense. But, he came out undersized, didn't test well in pretty much anything. It's going to be a really uphill battle, might be sliding into that UDFA range. But still someone that I would take a look at for the Ravens, because I do think he's got some pretty high level special teams ability and can be a really good box run defender as a box safety. Kind of redundant to what you have with Sanusi Kane, but still would definitely be in the mix. Then we move into the tight end group, one that tested really poorly overall. Terrence Ferguson was definitely not in that group, though. He tested at a 9.81 relative athletic score. He was really the standout to me. Again, it was a shocking group. I think they had it rated as like one of the slowest groups since 2000 in terms of overall 40 scores. The big thing with me about Terrence Ferguson is he's not a good run blocker, was more of an open field kind of one of those guys that would leak out and get yak and that sort of thing. So he doesn't interest me all that much, but he was definitely a winner in terms of going out and testing, especially amid such a poor testing group. So credit to him for going out and doing that. Luke Lachey is a guy that I definitely have my eyes on if the Ravens are going to get into the tight end market. Again, that's only probably coming if they move on from someone, but he's just one of those guys out of Iowa that I think plays a lot more physical. And I thought he tested pretty well. Would have loved to have seen him run a 40 just to kind of see some of that long speed. Definitely doesn't have the quickness, but he's explosive and you can kind of see that. And I think his run blocking is going to come along really well as kind of a third tight end. If the Ravens move to kind of that likely Kolar and move on from Andrews, he could be that interesting third tight end that kind of comes in and develops the way we saw Charlie Kolar do. So I thought he definitely tested well enough to be a winner. And then you look at the guys that were kind of in the loser category. Harold Fannin has had a ton of buzz around him just because of, in terms of his advanced statistics, he basically broke scales in terms of like yards per route run and all that kind of stuff. He had like 1,500 yards for Bowling Green last year. 13.3 yards per catch, 117 catches. Like he just broke scales in terms of production. I thought he was going to test a lot better, but really kind of speaks to, he's playing against lesser competition. But he dominated everyone to his credit, especially against like Penn State and Texas A&M were two of his best games of the year against, kind of Power 5 company. So it's good to kind of see him do that against top teams. But still, I guess I expected him to test better. I thought if he tested, I always say tested at the gym. If he would have done that, I think he goes a lot higher in this draft. But I think this will probably push him down a little bit. I think it's going to kind of make people think, oh, yeah, you dominate a lot of, lesser competition. Definitely not the athlete we're looking for. He also came in undersized, but I think he definitely plays a little bit bigger than that in terms of his receiving abilities. So it's going to be interesting to see what this does to his stock. And then the last guy, Gunnar Helm, a guy that a lot of people watched in the college football playoff. He's a receiving tight end that just didn't test well athletically, and that's going to kind of rub off a little bit. I know I saw a lot of people kind of looking at Jake Ferguson's testing scores just to kind of see a comparison, because I think those were the comps he was drawing. I haven't studied Gunnar Helm enough to kind of speak to him as a player, other than what I saw in the college football playoff, but that's something that I think just, again, tested poorly, a guy that was getting a little bit of that buzz. So I think overall it was pretty shocking to see some of these tight ends test so poorly, given people kept saying this is the best tight end class we've had in years. So that's what I have for you guys. If you guys enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button for me, hit subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment down below. Let me know, who did I miss out on? Who did you think stood out? Enjoy today, day 3. We'll come back to another recap tomorrow. Thank you to BetUS for sponsoring, and be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Peace out, everyone.